today we want to work on how a muscle works. That's the big concept that we want to understand today. So this is showing a dissection. It's actually showing the quadratus plantae muscle. And this is fascia here. This is what we call the plantar fascia. A lot of runners, people who run that are my age, have a lot of problems with that. The fascia gets too tight, they have a lot of pain, especially when their arches start to collapse. So we're going to work on muscles, muscle fibers, and muscle structures. So you're not going to have to worry about this for the test, so don't worry about those words. I'm not going to go there. But I just want to show you this so you kind of know what a muscle cell is. One of the other classes, theory was kind of confused. What is a muscle cell? She couldn't understand that. So you have fascia around everything in these different layers. Don't worry about that. It all comes down to this is actually a muscle cell or a muscle fibril. Okay, so they're little cells that become groups, and they get grouped so that you start off here, and there's two in a tube, and another tube, and another tube, within the tube, and the tube. So you have all these different muscle. This is the muscle cell itself, the muscle fibril. Now this is going to contract when you have a nerve input to it. I had it drawn up here, but the other teacher erased it, but I'll draw it again for you guys, what a motor unit looks like. So basically, the way this is going to work is just an overview. The brain is going to send a signal from the brain down the spinal cord, out the nerves. It's going to go to the bicep muscle. It's going to come out the nerves in the neck, and it's going to come into the muscle. And then, depending on how hard you're going to contract it, it's going to stimulate more or less nerves, which will stimulate more or less muscles. In the bicep muscle, for instance, probably every one neuron that's hooked to it, every one axon that goes to it, probably can control over 100 muscle fibrils, because it's not like it's real fine motor movement. It's just a strong muscle that flexes the elbow and does a little supination. Okay, if you're working with fingers like typing or writing or playing on video games. I know you're not playing, you're talking, but playing on video games or something like that, you have to be very dexterous. So those particular little muscle fibrils you might have one nerve that only controls 7 of them, or 10 of them. Whereas like the muscles in your back, the erector spinae, or your gluteal muscles, or your biceps, you may have one axon that controls over 200 muscle fibrils. Okay? Because your back muscles, they just need to contract. They don't need to do fine, dexterous things. But like if you're doing surgery or sewing or typing or writing, you need very fine muscle control. So with that, you'll have more neurons. You may have, for every 7 or 10 muscle fibrils, you'll have one neuron. But in the back muscles, like I said, you might have one neuron for 200 or 150 muscle fibrils, okay? So there's sarcolemma is what they call the muscle membrane, the muscle fiber in the membrane. Sarcoplasma is like cytoplasm, so that's the stuff that's inside. And then the thing that you're really going to worry about are the myofibrils. Those are the individual muscle cells for the muscle fibers. And they're made of what we call myofilaments. And the myofilaments are actually the actin and myosin. The actin are the thin ones, the myosin are the thick ones. So the myosin is going to grab onto the actin and it's going to slide it. When it slides it, the area in the middle called the H zone is going to disappear, and they're going to slide on each other, which makes a muscle shorten. Okay? So if I want to kick, oops, I'm going to knock my computer over. If I want to kick like this, or if I want to punch, or to move my arm, the muscle has to shorten for the movement to take place. So again, just to familiarize with those terms one more time, I know I've said this several times already, but the muscles have an origin and an insertion. Okay? So who wants to explain to me what an origin is and an insertion is? Where is the origin of the muscle? Is that the end of the muscle or the start of the muscle? That's the start. And the origin is more fixed. The insertion is what's going to move. So like the origin of the bicep means it has two heads. The first origin is the coracoid crosses the scapula. The other one's off the outside of the humerus. And it comes down here to the inside of the elbow. We call the medial aspect of the ulnar bone. So when the actin myosin fibrils slide on each other and contract, it's going to shorten and it's going to flex the elbow and turn it in, or supination. And at the end, it's going to flex the arm. It's going to flex this joint and this joint. Okay? So it shortens to make it move. Now, when that muscle relaxes and it elongates, the other muscle, the opposing muscle, the tricep, is going to flex. The tricep has three heads, that's why they call it tricep. So the tricep flexes, the bicep relaxes and has to elongate. Those two muscles work together synergistically. So when one works, the other one has to let go. And to control that, it's all controlled by your cerebellum. And it's the same thing for the legs. You have the muscles on the front of the legs. What are the four muscles in the front of the legs on the top called? Quadriceps. There's actually the vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, rectus femoris, and vastus intermedius underneath. But you don't need to know that. You can just call it quadriceps. And what are the muscles behind the leg that flex the knee? What are those called in the back? Hamstrings. There's three hamstrings. There's the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, and the semimembranosus. Those muscles oppose or antagonists to the quadriceps. They work synergistically so you can walk and run and lift your legs and do all that kind of stuff. Okay? So let me see if I'm going to show you more pictures of this. I think I'm going to go ahead. So the myofilaments have light bands and dark bands. That's why when you look at, remember when you guys are looking under the slide and you can see it looks striated, you can see different colors. There are light bands and dark bands. Those are actually the myosin and the actin. That's what you're actually seeing, the light bands and the dark bands, okay? So these are just, oh, what happened? Oh, it came up, thanks. It's got a bad contact here, so it comes on. Thank you for pointing that out. So you have light bands and dark bands that make up the actin and the myosin fibrils. This is what it looks like, more like if you blow it up. So what you have here is, they call this is the Z line here. This is schematic, this is what it looks like under a microscope. And you have this H zone here. So when the actin and myosin fibrils contract, this will actually come together like that. So this will move. So that they'll move. And the way that works is the nervous system sends a sensory input goes, and then it goes down the motor unit, and then it causes it to contract. And the way it causes it to contract is it actually releases calcium, and the calcium blocks tryptomyosin, which I'll show you that in a second. So this is the hierarchy. You have muscles, and then they have bundles of muscles, what they call fasciculas and myofibrils, myofilaments, and then you get down to the very actual cell, it's the actin and myosin fibrils. Okay? But for them to work, you have to have nerve input. You have to have innervation. So the muscles will not contract unless a nerve sends a signal to the muscles and tells them to contract. And where the nerves come into the muscles, or where nerves hook to nerves, there's always an area where they don't actually touch. There's something called a synaptic cleft. It's a little space, and the space has to connect. And the way it connects with, it releases a little chemical. In skeletal muscle, the chemical is ACH, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a nerve neurotransmitter. There are lots of neurotransmitters in the body, but for skeletal muscle, for muscles, it's acetylcholine. And acetylcholine comes from pantothenic acid, which is a B vitamin. That's where we get our acetylcholine in our diet. So that's very important for muscle contraction. The nerve transmission will not keep going unless these ACH is released. Okay? So I'm going to show it to you on these pictures, and I'm also going to show you an animated video of it. So this is again just showing the motor unit, or the neuromuscular junction. This thing here is representing the axon, part of the nerve. And then this is the synaptic cleft, where this is the muscle fibers. What do you think these things are here in the muscle fiber for energy? Those are mitochondria. It's supposed to be mitochondria. So it has to release a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, for the message to get there. And when it does that, it'll release calcium. When it releases the calcium, it'll show it in the animated video. It'll block the one chemical that makes it so that the actin and myosin can't hook together. The tryptomyosin, it'll block tryptomyosin, yes. I'm not sure because I haven't run the test yet. But you'll have to know what an actin is and what a dendrite is. You'll have to know that you need some type of neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, to cross the synaptic cleft to make it work. But I don't know if we'll have pictures and you'll label it. I'm not sure how to test you on that yet, because you haven't gotten to that point. So this is showing here, see this? Here, this is showing acetylcholine being released. And then it releases calcium. This is kind of a more complicated drawing. So these are just different schematics of way. It looks more like this in real life. But this is a drawing to try to explain it to you guys. So the myosin wants to bind to the actin, but it can't do it because tryptomyosin is blocking it. But when your nerve releases the acetylcholine and it crosses the information, crosses the cleft, the signal crosses the synaptic cleft, then it'll release calcium. Excuse me, and the calcium will block the tryptomyosin, and then the myosin fiber will be able to reach down like fingers and slide the actin and move it. So then you'll get the actin and myosin fibrils will contract and they'll slide under each other and it will shorten the muscle. Okay? So let's see if anybody understood what I just said. Okay. Andy, you're listening. You're looking up here. So what has to happen? What comes down to this to make this happen? What do you call it? Where does the transmission of the signal come from? To the muscle. Yeah, to cause a muscle contraction, where does the signal have to come from first? The brain, spinal cord, out the nerves to the cell. And what do you call the part that comes down here that hooks to this? What's that? The actin part of the neuron comes down. And then it's not showing it, it's showing it down here. But it doesn't actually touch, there's a little space. What do you call that space in between the axon and the muscle fiber itself? The synaptic cleft. Okay, so what has to cross the synaptic cleft so that the muscle gets the signal from the nerve? What do you call that chemical that has to cross the synaptic cleft? Acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is what? What type of transmitter is it? It's a neurotransmitter. You guys know, like in your brain, there's lots of neurotransmitters. Like, you've ever heard of serotonin? You ever heard of serotonin? People that are depressed, they don't make enough serotonin. That's why they're depressed. Okay, you've never heard of dopamine or anything? You've never heard of these neurotransmitters? Okay, that's okay. There's lots of neurotransmitters in your brain, in your spinal cord, in your nerves. But for skeletal muscle, the most common one is acetylcholine, ACH. Okay? So that's how it works. Your brain sends a signal from the brain down the spinal cord, out the nerves, and the spinal nerves come out the neck for the arm. They come out the low back for the leg. They come out in the thoracic region. They come out the thoracic vertebrae to go to the heart, to control the heart and lungs and all that. And then when it goes down, neurons hook to neurons. So neurons hook to 3 different areas. Neurons hook to another neuron, because it's not one neuron that goes from my brain to my bicep. There's thousands of neurons. So neurons hook to other neurons, or they hook to a muscle, or they hook to an organ or a gland. They might hook to a sweat gland so you can sweat. They might hook to hydrochloric acid forming gland. What's a hydrochloric acid forming gland in the stomach called? Parietal cells. You guys don't remember that 2 months ago. Parietal cells, right? You remember parietal cells now? Chief cells make pepsin. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid. Okay. So anyways, here's a big globe of that. This is showing the myosin actually attaching to, the myosin's actually attaching to the actin, and it's going to slide it like little fingers running along. They're going to grab, you're going to grab on here, and they're going to move it. They're going to slide it, and then they're going to slide within each other, and that's going to make the muscle shorten. So you guys understand that concept? Actin and myosin have to attach. The myosin pulls the actin along and it slides it and makes your muscle short. You're starting to kind of get a feel for that? Sue-Led? You starting to understand this a little bit, or what? Am I speaking Martian to you? Am I still speaking in Martian? Nobody understands me? What do you think, Kel? Are you understanding this a little bit? Okay, good. So they just call this a sarcomere. A sarcomere is an individual myofilament where you have the myosin and actin fibers. And what do you need besides the neurotransmitter? What do you need to make a muscle contract?
Energy.
ATP, energy. Good job. So it's interesting though that when we make ATP from, what do we make ATP from, class?
Sugar.
From sugar, from glucose, or fructose, or lactose, or one of those sugars, right? So it's interesting that 25% of the sugar that we burn and we make ATP from, we only use 25% of the energy for our muscles and for a lot of the functions in our body. Up to almost 75% is just to keep us warm. Doesn't that seem wasteful? We use a lot of energy just to keep our bodies warm. And what gland controls how warm you are? It controls your basal metabolic rate. You guys haven't had this yet. The thyroid gland in your neck. The thyroid gland controls your metabolic. So when people eat too much wheat and too much dairy, and they have autoimmune disease and it attacks their thyroid gland and kills the thyroid gland, it's called Hashimoto's, or autoimmune thyroid disease, or low functioning thyroid. What do you think happens to their metabolism when you kill the thyroid gland? Ladies, what happens to your metabolism when you kill your thyroid gland by eating too much wheat? Does your metabolism get faster or slower?
Slower.
Slower, and you might gain a lot of weight. Your skin will get dry. You'll start to lose the outside of your eyebrows. Your hair will start to get very thin. Those are all signs. You'll be sleepy and lethargic all the time, have no energy. Sounds like a teacher to me. This is the symptoms of becoming a teacher, huh? So, these are just a couple of concepts that you guys are going to have to understand, ladies. So, what does threshold stimulus mean? Has anybody heard of that?
Threshold.
Threshold stimulus. So basically the nerve has to come up to a certain amount until it crosses the threshold across the semantic cliff to make the contraction happen. So the contraction is going to happen or not happen. It's not like it's a partial contraction. You can have partial contractions in your muscle because you're stimulating less nerves, less muscle fibrils. Girls, shh. You're shh. No talking, please. We're recording. Okay? So, how hard your muscle contracts depends on how many nerves you stimulate and how many microfilaments you stimulate. So, if you want a really strong contraction, Scarlett, if you really want a strong contraction, you're going to stimulate more nerves and more microfilaments, right? But when they contract and they get over that threshold stimulus,
now we're going to go to the short answers. Firstly, describe the functions of the skin. Like the skin covers and protects the internal living organs. It insulates the body and synthesizes vitamin D when UV rays. Second, how does exposure to ultraviolet light influence the melanin production of the skin? So melanin is the pigment molecule in the epidermis. So depending on how long the skin cells are influenced by UV rays, the pigment molecule changes its color. It also has to do with the hereditary of
so you're doing a great job, Eddie. Can you speak up just a little bit so I can hear you better? Thanks.
Describe the functions of the epidermis. It provides the skin with a waterproof barrier, produce oil, which is like policy vibe. Okay. Then it is to smooth the skin and create our skin tone. The fourth one is how our hair and nails similar in structure. Both the hair and nails grow throughout life, and it contains a protein keratin and both instruments are. Okay, what structures contain keratin? All nails, hair, and skin contain keratin. Explain how the dermis enables the body to interact with the external environment. The dermis holds sensory vessels and glands to pressure, temperature, and to vibrate, which enables us to navigate through the environments without harming ourselves.
Okay, good.
So the last part is the structure and function of relationship.
Okay, shh. Go ahead.
This part here, the green part is the epidermis.
Mm-hmm.
Below that is
The dermis?
Dermis is like composed of dead cells. Here it's more like a living part.
The living part, yeah. So what are those big black things sticking out of there? What are those things?
Hair.
The hair?
Yeah.
So at the base of the hair, what's at the base you have?
That's one.
Yeah, these are the follicles.
Here are the pores, these little folds,
Mm-hmm.
and like underneath the sweat glands. I believe these are the white glands, but I don't know.
So the dermis is alive and very dynamic and much thicker than the epidermis. The epidermis is more like the cells that are just for protection, that are, especially the last few layers are dead.
I feel these are composed of hair follicles, blood vessels, and the nerve, and to then the glands, sweat and water glands. Yeah, that's what.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Eddie. You did a good job.
It is a system that involves like nails, skin, and
Nails, skin, and hair. So this is a picture of it up here on the board? Okay, cool. What are you going to teach us?
So, vocabulary, exocrine glands are the glands that release secretion through the ducts and helps create sweat and oils while remaining homeostasis.
So why do we need sweat and oil, Soulette? How does that maintain homeostasis? What's the sweat do, and what's the oil do to the skin?
sweat secretes waste that we don't need, and insulates our body, and therefore the oil it kind of smoothens our skin.
So the skin keeps our skin supple and not dried out and protected. And what does sweat do? How does that control our body, maintain homeostasis?
Controls the body.
Evaporation of the water. So when you get hot, you get vasodilation of the blood vessels. The skin becomes flushed. And you start to perspire and let water go out. Why does water, when it evaporates, why does that take away heat? How does water take away heat? Because you have to break the hydrogen bonds and it takes lots of energy. Good job. Keep going, Sulet.
Melanin is a pigment produced by cells in the lower layers of epidermis and determines the color of the skin.
Yes, and if you have a lot of melanin, like you guys have a little bit more than me because I'm a real white boy, you guys are protected from the sun, which is really cool. The more melanin you have, the harder it is to get sunburned. That's why if you keep getting exposed to the sun, you'll get darker and darker because your body keeps releasing more and more melanin, which will make you more resistant to the UV light.
Sebum is a fatty substance that coats the surface of the skin and shafts of hair, preventing excess water loss, lubricating and softening the skin at the same time.
Okay, cool. Where else in the body do you release something that's kind of oily like that to protect the body? Besides the hair. That keeps, if you don't wash your hair after like a week, it'll get real greasy, right? Because of all of that buildup of that, right? Where else in our body do you think that we release stuff like that? Yes, all over the skin, but actually in the ear, in the external auditory meatus, the hole, it releases cerumen, which is very similar to that, which is like a waxy substance. Okay.